Cicero, an eloquent man who loved his country well. The speeches and writings of Marcus Tullius Cicero, 106 to 43 BCE, contain numerous passages justifying the assassination of Julius Caesar, as well as the role of the conservative party in Roman politics. Born near Rome into a non-noble equestrian family, Cicero achieved such great fame as a courtroom lawyer that in 63 BCE he was elected to the consulship with the backing of the Optimates, which were the conservative party at the time, who desired at all costs to defeat the bid of the radical Catiline for that office. Following his consulship, during which he suppressed the Catilinarian conspiracy and was eulogized as father of his country by the Senate, Cicero was unable to take an active part in the turbulent politics of the dying republic. Being but a new man among the senatorial nobility and lacking the essential support of either great wealth or legions, in his desire never to stop seeking the good of the community, he turned to the writing of popular treatises on political theory and moral philosophy. These treatises became the medium through which much of the best of Greek thought on these subjects was transmitted to the Romans. Running as a thread through all of Cicero's writings and the speeches in his concern for freedom and order in society, and conversely his opposition to despotism. With such fervor and eloquence does he expound his theme, together with the Roman ideal of virtue, as dedication to social and civic duty, that his views have become an integral part of the Western heritage. And on the evidence of Plutarch's Life of Cicero, it appears that even Caesar's heir and successor, Augustus, recognized Cicero's contribution. I have heard that Caesar Augustus, a long time after, once went to see one of his daughter's sons, and as the youth had in his hand one of Cicero's writings, he was afraid and hid it in his vest, which Caesar, observing, took the book and read a good part of it while standing, and then returning the book said, "An eloquent man, my son, and one who loved his country well." Concerning an advocate of property rights, Greek philosophy, and the status quo, from a courtroom speech delivered in 56 BCE, and from his last treatise on philosophy written in 44 BCE, Cicero's concern for freedom and order often took on a strong reactionary slant. On such occasions, he is little more than a propagandist for vested interests, concerned with preserving property rights and the status quo, and not adverse to slanting the evidence to serve his purpose. This narrowness of outlook is a reflection of Cicero's supposition that the Republic's ills were caused by the seditious activities of a few mad revolutionaries. The selections also include in his writings Cicero's views on the value of philosophy and why he turned to it, in particular to the academic school founded by Plato, which, under the leadership of men like Carneades, had rejected Plato's dogmatism and had adopted the views of the skeptic school of philosophy founded by Socrates' disciple Antisthenes. The skeptic's liberal, open-minded approach to truth required that it be tested by experience and exposed to the possibility of contradiction. As Cicero put it in another of his philosophical writings, quote, "The only difference between us and the dogmatists is that they have no doubt of the truth of their case, whereas we consider many doctrines probable and are prepared to act on them, but hardly to affirm them as certain." And then Cicero also said that, "And this is the highest statesmanship and the soundest wisdom on the part of a good citizen, not to divide the interests of the citizens, but to unite all on the basis of impartial justice." He also spoke of two classes of men eager to engage in politics, as well as the advocation to study philosophy, and that the state has no right to invade the property rights of free men. He was a champion of liberty, the second Philippic. For a few months following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, the Senate reasserted a shaky and bumbling control of state affairs, with Cicero again playing a leading role. It first outmaneuvered Mark Antony, Caesar's lieutenant and colleague in the consulship, and then with the decisive assistance of the young Octavian, the future Augustus, and his legions, defeated him in battle and forced him to flee Italy. Exultant hopes for a new era of Republican constitutionalism were short-lived, however. Once Antony no longer seemed a danger, the Senate slighted Octavian. The young man is to be praised, honored, and set aside, advised Cicero, with the result that he joined with Antony and Lepidus in forming a new military dictatorship, the Second Triumvirate. But during the struggle with Antony, Cicero assumed the role as a second Demosthenes, fighting for liberty against another, Philip. He denounced Antony in a series of 14 Philippic orations, thereby assuring his own death at the hands of Antony's agents during the proscriptions that followed the establishment of the Second Triumvirate. The following selection from the Second Philippic, which is the most famous of the series, is both a good example of the powerful invective directed at Antony and the late Julius Caesar as well, and a less eloquent statement of the higher ideals that underlay Cicero's attachment to the Republic. And because Cicero's political career had ended as it had begun, fighting despotism, 2 generations later the historian Velleius Paterculus could confidently predict in a passage directed against Mark Antony, "He lives and will live in the memory of all succeeding ages. All posterity will admire his writings against you, and execrate your conduct toward him, and sooner shall the race of man fail in the world than his name decay." And of course Cicero also had many other speeches as well. Cicero takes up various charges made by Antony against him, including the charge that Cicero caused the war between Caesar and Pompey. But then Cicero also wrote the laws. He said, let us investigate the origins of justice. And it is generally held that Roman law, because of its lasting influence on Western civilization, is the greatest achievement of the Romans. And this influence stems from the universality of Roman law, the result of the efforts of Roman legal scholars to formulate abstract principles of law that would be generally applicable. These legal scholars, or jurisprudentes, or those skilled in law, who worked chiefly during the classical age of Roman law from Trajan to Septimius Severus, were conversant with the world of letters as well as with the world of politics, and so were able then to find meaningful relationships between philosophical truths and empirical situations, an accomplishment illustrated, for example, by their imaginative adjustment of Stoicism to the jus civile, or Roman law. This description of the jurisprudentes of the early empire applies also to Cicero as well, whose concern for the reestablishment of order in the late Republic led him to view law as something based upon universal principles of right that it is the duty of philosophy to teach. Utilizing the Stoic formula of one God, one reason, one commonwealth, and one universal law, Cicero in the Laws expounds the theme that this universal law is not a product of human thought, nor is it any enactment of peoples, but something eternal, which rules the whole universe by its wisdom in command and prohibition. Of course, it is the source of what Cicero calls the rational principles on which our laws must be based. When man-made laws are so based, then Cicero will have achieved his purpose, which is to promote the firm foundation of states, the strengthening of cities, and the curing of the ills of peoples. Cicero wrote the laws as a sequel to his Republic, an idealized account of the constitution of the early Republic of Rome, the finished picture of another century, which Polybius had described. It is in the form of a Platonic dialogue, and the participants are Cicero, his brother Quintus, and his good friend Pomponius Atticus. Next, we will talk about Lucretius, Titus Lucretius Carus, from around 99 to 55 BCE, who was born of aristocratic parents amidst the social and moral decline of the Roman Republic's fatal last century. He was mostly known for his Epicurean philosophy at Rome, and he saw his fellow citizens in their greed for gain swelling their possessions out of civil war, doubling their wealth by piling murder on murder, and welcoming a brother's tragic death with heartless glee. He rejected the normal political career open to men of his class, for to seek power, an empty thing which is never gained, and ever to labor sore in that pursuit, is but struggling to push up, never gained, and never to labor sore in that pursuit, but is struggling to push up a mountain, a stone that rolls back from the very top and rushes down to the level of the open plain. And he was a mostly a poet as well. Thoroughly disillusioned with life, Lucretius withdrew into the seclusion of what he called the Ivory Tower, or Quiet Citadel, in the translation presented here. And again, he said that to seek power an empty thing which never gained, and never to labor sore in that pursuit, is but struggling to push up a mountain, a stone that rolls back from the very top and rushes down to the level of the open plain. But retreat from the world did not mean for Lucretius an indifference to the welfare of his fellow citizens. There had come to him as a sudden revelation of truth comes to one who has long been without truth, a new faith and a new ideal. With the impassioned enthusiasm of a prophet, he presented his views in a long didactic poem, De Rerum Natura, or On the Nature of Things. And this, of course, would be a brilliant reading in the philosophy of science as well. So his new faith was founded on the belief that science could destroy ignorance, from which came all the evil in the world, and his new ideal was the tranquility that men could achieve in their lives if they would only be guided by reason. Again, that's his didactic poem, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. The source of this revelation was the Hellenistic philosophy of Epicurus, from around 342 to 270 BCE, who taught that the happiness sought after by man consisted simply of being free from pain in body and mind. And by pleasure we mean the absence of pain in the body and of trouble in the soul. Epicurus, in turn, based his simple ethical philosophy upon the physics of Democritus, who existed in the 5th century BCE and is known as one of the pre-Socratic philosophers, who taught that the universe is composed of tiny particles of matter called atoms that come together and then fall apart, thus providing the constant flux and change that is characteristic of all material things and all life. Of course, atoms was the name for the things that could not be divided, but now we know that atoms can be split and divided. But regardless of that, there is, according to Epicurus, no meaning or purpose to be found in the workings of the natural world. Although people have free will, the result of the ability of atoms to swerve, which is a concept added by Epicurus to Democritus's purely deterministic atomic theory, and they are still a part of nature. Their birth and death represent the temporary coalescence and final disintegration of a group of atoms. The gods do not concern themselves with mundane affairs, but spend their time pursuing happiness, like good Epicureans. When people understand that the world has no purpose or teleology, they can be freed from the fears, the errors, and the vain pursuits, including love, both physical and romantic, that produce unhappiness. And so that is Lucretius, who talks about the nature of happiness. He also talks about first principles, obviously, that all particles of matter are on the move, that atoms swerve. And, of course, he talks about other things as there's nothing to fear in death, and the thing called love, be on your guard. And so that is our video on Lucretius and Cicero.